Are you struggling with your story writing confidence? Are you burnt out in the writing process and now you're needing a refresher to get back into things? Or maybe you're a new writer who hasn't yet had the chance to get burnt out, but you're preemptively looking to build those storytelling skills. If any of that sounds like you, then you've clicked on the right video. I have 8 tips for you today that you can apply to your writing and to your life to become a better story writer instantly. We're going to talk about reading more, writing more, what pre-writing you should be doing, what craft elements to focus on, developing your characters and their dialogue, and how to edit mercilessly. And here are the chapters in this video. If you want to skip ahead to anything, you can click on the chapters in the description. I'm not here to waste your time, so if you need to jump ahead, you can't stick around for the full video, please by all means do so. Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a short story writer with a bachelor's degree in creative writing, and at one point, I was right where you are now. I was looking for ways to grow my craft as a writer, find my voice and my style, and learn about this crazy art that I was so passionate about. And now I'm teaching you what I've spent years learning so that you don't have to fumble through it all before deciding to sit through 4 years of school and go into student debt just to be able to write a decent story. You've probably heard that to become a good writer, you need to read often and read broadly, right? Well, I'm gonna tell you again because it is such a good piece of writing advice that I don't think that you can hear too often. So, to become a good writer, you need to read often and read broadly. When I say read broadly, I mean to try different authors, different genres, different story structures, character types, cultures, different styles, different lengths of work. Everything that you read should be different from the last thing in some capacity. When you read, you want to read like a writer. There's this great book by Francine Prose called Reading Like a Writer, and I would show you my copy, but I left it on a plane in 2019, so here is a lovely photo of the cover. It's a wonderful book that teaches you how to read in order to become a better writer. Prose talks about close reading, which is the act of reading from an analytical standpoint. You're looking at how this author constructs their sentences and paragraphs. You're noticing the word choice and the diction. What plot elements is this writer using? How do they pull off raising your heart rate? And why do you feel so attached to that main character from the very first page? Even if you don't close read every single time that you pick up a book, it's still important to read often. You'll read good writing and start to absorb it. It's like learning a language. Listening to a language helps you pick up on pronunciation and rhythm. You start to subconsciously pick up on the cadence and inflections of the language. The more you read, the more you'll pick up on the tricks that authors are using to hook you and bring you into their stories. And that brings me to my next point, writing often. When you listen to a language, you start to hear those subtleties of it, but the only way to put into action what you've learned is to speak that language. The same is true for reading and writing. You can read and analyze great writing all day long, but if you don't practice the skills that you're picking up, then what's the point? I'm assuming that you're here because you want to write great stories and not just analyze them. Simply put, the more you flex those writing muscles, the stronger they're gonna get. Even writing for 10 minutes a day can help you in this process. Write something bad. Give yourself the gift of no pressure. Don't sit down every time you write and think that it needs to be perfect. If you need the motivation and discipline of a writing routine, I do have another video all about setting up a writing routine using the science of habits, which you can find in the description. And that brings us to pre-writing. Pre-writing is a great way to warm up. It helps you sort out what's happening in your story, but it's not the actual story itself. Pre-writing can look like a lot of different things, but what you're probably most familiar with is the character profile and outlining. I do have a training on how to use a character profile without it being just another form of productive procrastination. This technique that I teach in my character profile training helps you take that information in your character profile and transfer it into your story in a way that matters. It teaches you how to craft a character arc or plot a story based on your character profile. It's totally free and you can get that in the description as well. Some other examples of pre-writing might look like writing scenes that don't actually fit into your story, but help you understand your character in a new way. It might be world building exercises that help you dive into your story setting. You might keep a list of ideas on your phone throughout the day so that when you do sit down to write, you're ready to go with a new idea. Just because we have that prefix pre on the word pre-writing doesn't mean that we have to do all of this before we start writing a story. This can all happen at any point during your writing process to help you gain some clarity on your story, your characters, the setting, whatever it might be. Now let's talk about some craft elements. To really elevate that story, you're going to want to pick out a few craft elements to really focus on and use strategically in your story. As a refresher, craft elements are things like characterization, plot, point of view, setting, voice, mood, tone, dialogue. The list goes on. Basically, a craft element is anything that you use to help convey your story in a certain way. When done well, craft elements are invisible in a story. You get caught up in the turn of events or the rollout of new information, but you're not sitting there thinking, oh, this plot is really well structured. Well, if you're reading like a writer, you might be thinking that. It's important to intentionally pick why you're writing in first person versus third person, why your character speaks the way that they do, what tone your narrator gives off, where the setting of your story is, what the tone and the mood of your story feel like. Again, the list goes on. But this also shouldn't be overwhelming. The more that you read, the more you write, the more that you continue to learn about the craft of writing, this stuff will start to come naturally to you. Which is why you should subscribe to this channel so you can keep learning all of these craft elements and all of the ways to use them in your story. That was a pretty smooth plug, wasn't it? Okay, so we're halfway through these 8 tips, so we're going to continue on by talking about why you need to prioritize characterization, elevating your dialogue, and editing mercilessly. So let's get into those. If you've seen any of my videos or read any of my blog posts, then you know what I'm about to say. Your characters are everything. If your reader can't connect to your character, then you might as well not even have a story. That might sound harsh, but I say it to really get you to focus on characterization. Well-developed characters are the bread and butter to every story. If we didn't like Katniss and Primrose, would we even care that Primrose's name got called at the lottery in Hunger Games and the way that Katniss stood up to volunteer in her place? If Blair and Serena weren't well-rounded characters, how would we ever put up with all of the awful choices that they made? What I'm getting at is, your plot can be stellar, your craft elements can all fall into place, but if your characters aren't well developed, your reader is going to lose interest. We want to read to connect to other people, and this goes hand in hand with great dialogue. Dialogue is a craft element that I wanted to pull out and look at specifically because it really can make or break a story. Dialogue is hard to master. It's really hard to authentically show the speech of another person, but I do have a few tips that will help you elevate your dialogue no matter what kind of characters you've written. Despite what you've heard, it is okay to tell and not show sometimes. When 2 characters meet for the first time, you might be tempted to show us the introductions. But if your reader already separately knows who those characters are, that can feel a little redundant and might slow the pacing of your story. The 2 characters might actually have to get introduced to each other for your story to continue, and that's fine. We can see that happening, but it might be better to tell rather than really show that happening. You can use one sentence to say, Mikey introduced Pete and Sam, rather than showing us a bunch of, hey, how are yas? Always use the word said in your dialogue tags. I know that there is a ton of advice out there, like 100 words to use other than said, or said is dead, but I'm here to tell you that said is very much alive. Said is an invisible word in your writing. You could use the phrase he said 1,000 times in your story and your reader will not bat an eye. But if you use he laughed or he smirked, even 10 times each, your reader might start to pick up on that pattern and get a little bit fatigued with that repetitive word. So remember, always use said. And lastly for now, keep dialogue short and sweet where you can. If your character has paragraphs all on top of each other of dialogue, there's probably a better way to convey that scene. Bricks of dialogue can get overwhelming, and honestly, your reader might forget who's talking after a while. But the beautiful thing about writing is editing. When you have a first draft done, I want you to edit that thing mercilessly. If something isn't working, it's okay to cut it out. You don't need to try to salvage everything. It's really easy to get caught up in this sunk cost fallacy when writing, and just because you wrote something that you enjoy doesn't mean that it necessarily moves your story forward. You have to be honest with yourself, or if you're too close to the work, have somebody else read it for you and take a look and see what they think. And that brings me to my last tip for today, which is to trust your gut. As you continue to read and write, you'll develop a writer's intuition, and these things will come naturally to you. It's okay to not get it at the very get-go. You should trust that you'll be able to edit and make decisions to help move your story forward. Your story will come together as you chisel away at it. The newer you are, the longer that might take, but that's okay, just enjoy the process. Okay, those are my 8 tips on better story writing skills. And again, you can take my free training on developing characters using a character profile, and it's listed below in the description. If you have any questions or any other tips that you think should be on this list, leave a comment so we can all learn from each other. And if you made it this far, like that video so I can see who stuck around to the end. And you know, I'm all about growing our skills together in community, so be sure to subscribe so you can stick around as that community grows. I'll see you next week, and until then, happy writing.